Hi, this is Paul Palmer. Just recently, I've talked a few times about communication and team and things that are impacted by the globalization of the pharmaceutical supply chain. But there's another problem, compliance. How do you know that the supplier that you're working with is compliant? Well, if you're in an area where you have consistent implementation of legislation, then theoretically you should expect the person that you're purchasing from to have the right level of compliance. What do you do when you're talking to somebody who's not working to the same legislation, that doesn't have the same regulations, who's basically GMP, good manufacturing practice, good distribution practice, even GCP, good clinical practice, good laboratory practice, any of the GXPs are different to the one that you're working with. So here comes the challenge of globalization. How do you make sure what you're getting is compliant? You can go and audit, yes, of course. But how long does it last? Auditing's a sample. How can you be sure that the level of control that's implemented is adequate to maintain the supply chain? Well, evidence, I suppose, is the best way. But how do you know the evidence is up to what you need? You have to work closely with the team. You have to make sure that you understand the supplier that you're working with. Make sure that you visit them, or one of your team does. Make sure that you have direct communication, whether that be verbally through Skype or Zoom or Teams or whatever it is that you want to use. But then also look at what they supply. Does the level of documentation they supply consistently, without reminder, without requesting something extra, reflect what you expect from them? If it doesn't, what can you do about it? Well, communicate with them. Explain that you have concerns because the documentation that they're sending doesn't meet your requirements, as was discussed when you were on site. What else might you do? Well, you might think about how you're going to ensure that the product coming into your country, to your field, to your state, whatever you want to call it, meets your requirements. Well, often there's an import test. You can either do, you might do an ID, depending on what standards you're working to. You might do a full spec test. You might just do visual and ID. You might do something else. Degradation products. It depends what you've decided on. What could impact the product during shipping. If you've got variation in temperature throughout the shipping, and you cannot be certain that it's not going to impact the shelf life of the product, then maybe you are going to do full spec testing. But is that full spec testing the first time once enough? What does your stability show? Does it show that you increase your degradation products, you reduce your active product over that 6-week shipping time if it's by sea? Or maybe the conditions are harsher at sea and you have to ship it by air, but the air could affect your packaging. Maybe you've got a sterile product and it's no longer integral after the air shipment. Maybe it's still integral, but you lost something en route. I've been involved in loads of different supply chains. And I found recently that people are actually more interested in the stories that I've got to share, the explanation about what we found and what we've done about it, how to approach it, what you might want to do about it next. And that's why I've decided when I do launch my course next month, I'm going to include lots of stories, case studies, worked examples. And on top of that, when somebody has a specific request or a specific requirement or a specific instance that they're involved in, and I've got a relevant experience, I'm going to share that too. And if I don't have a relevant experience already, I'm going to offer to go and visit the site and look at it with them. I won't guarantee that it's going to be no extra cost though. We'll see. I haven't quite decided that yet. I have a course coming up next month, April, 2021. And it's going to be discussing quality assurance principles. So, okay, it's not quite that. It's quality assurance mastery. And it's quality assurance mastery targeting primarily the pharmaceutical industry. Now, I know I've discussed the principles with colleagues from medical devices, but I think if I try and extend it to include medical devices as well, on this occasion, it's going to make the course a bit unwieldy. And also it'll mean that some people will find that certain parts are relevant and other parts are not. Well, what I prefer is to make sure the content that I'm producing is relevant to the people attending. And if that means I do the job twice and use examples that are relevant to the other niche, the other people, I'll do it twice. I don't mind. Because what I'm really here for is to help, because that's what I enjoy. Like today, I've just done good distribution practice. Now, I delivered the standard course, but I added embellishments. I added additional stories from my experience. I find it quite funny that I don't really like calling them stories, but that's what they are. Okay, maybe they're case studies, but actually stories feels better because I tell people about what happened, what the experience was, how I dealt with it, and what the outcome was, taking you from and to, from the beginning, where the problem was, to the end. What do you do about it? And what do you do when you go and audit somewhere and you find a big problem? Do you then call back to the office and panic? No, you don't. You look at what the problem is. Is it critical to your supply chain? If it is, how are you going to manage it? What concerns do you have that you need to raise? And are they willing to address them? The globalization of the pharmaceutical industry, it's not going to change. Pharmaceuticals are here to stay, and so is the rest of the world. So when you think about what you're doing with your supply chain, when you understand that supply chain map, think about where the risks are. Where's the risk for you? Where's the risk for the product? If there isn't a risk for the product, well, does it matter? Well, it does if it's non-compliant. But if it's just non-compliant with the technical agreement, and all that you need to do is to change it because it still meets your requirements on delivery, well, it's really a non-observation, isn't it? But it is an observation that needs to be addressed. It's still an observation that you need to make sure that your agreement with your supplier fulfills your needs. And your needs, your explanation, your preferences are being met. And if they're not, what are you going to do about it? What are they going to do about it? Don't just run away, work together. Because a win-win is always better than a win-lose. Okay, that's it for today. That's Paul Palmer. I'll talk to you soon.